Father, we thank you for a time that we can get together. This is a whole lot better than a lot of other things we could be doing. We appreciate it. We thank you for your love for us. We thank you for your word. We thank you for your spirit and your life that fill us. For eternity, we bless you. Amen. Well, there's a lot of stuff in here. And I'm afraid, I'm just asking you, please, do your best to stay awake. We talked last time about specific signs that happened. We'll start with that and then finish up with even more on the siege of Jerusalem. I'm amazed reading this guy, and I told you he really has thrown a great portion of his life into this. He was, he believed like everybody so many of the things that were brought up by dispensationalists when they came in and started doing their deal. And but he began to really look at Scripture and begin to question and began to do the research. And I'm just really shocked at some of the things that I've read that he puts in here. There's really some good stuff. You'll see it as we go along. I'll shout it so that you can be awake. We're coming to a good part, do something like that. First, I imagine most of you have looked at this, but let's open your Bibles. We'll start there. Maybe something that'll maybe keep you a little bit sort of awake. Open, let's see, go to Isaiah. Go to, let's see here, chapter 13. Isaiah 13. Miss Davis, will you do the honors? Read verses 9 through 11, please.
Behold, the day of the Lord is coming, cruel with fury and burning with anger, to make the land a desolation. He will exterminate its sinners from it. For the stars of heaven and their constellations will not flash forth their lights. The sun will be dark when it rises, and the moon will not shed its light. Thus I will punish the world for its evil, and the wicked for their iniquity. I will also put an end to the arrogance of the proud and abase the haughtiness of the ruthless. I will make mortal man scarcer than pure gold, and mankind than the gold of Ophir. Therefore I shall make the heavens tremble, and the earth will be shaken from its place at the fury of the Lord of hosts in the day of his burning anger.
Interesting. Heard any of that before? Sound kind of familiar? As long as we're in Isaiah, we'll keep it kind of simple. Turn to chapter 34. We could read through a lot of stuff there, but he's talking about his anger against the nations, and Seth or Screeve or whoever you may be today, would you read verses, I tell you what, just read verse 4, that's fine.
And all the host of heaven will wear away, and the sky will be rolled up like a scroll. All their hosts will also wither away, as a leaf withers from the vine, or as one withers from the fig tree.
You hear Jesus' talking of bringing up after he had spoken of these things. Now let me tell you the parable of the fig tree. You hear also from Revelation chapter 6, the stars of heaven fell into the earth. A fig tree cast her untimely figs. Heavens departed as a scroll. I mean, it's amazing the stuff from Isaiah, Ezekiel, etc. that is in the book of Revelation. Some of it, I think we can go, well, it may be what they call apocryphal language, but I think that, again, are not defining terms, I think the way that God is defining them. And Now, here, let me tell you one of the problems, because we're going to read this scripture and then we'll see kind of what I'm talking about. Turn to Daniel chapter 8. Turn to Daniel 8. Read 9 and 10, please.
Out of one of them came forth a rather small horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the beautiful land. It grew up to the host of heaven, and caused some of the host and some of the stars to fall to the earth, and it trampled them down.
Interesting. We see this again, and the reason, what I was going to bring up a minute ago, is that people will say, well, we have to be literal. We have to be literal. Now, I understand where they're coming from. I do, but they're wrong. They're right in that we need to be as literal as we can about a lot of this stuff. But when language that is meant to be, how can we say this? It may be language that we are using as like a figure of speech, but that figure of speech may be very accurately communicating to us something very literal. The problem is, how are we going to define that the way that it is spoken? A lot of people go, well, as soon as you get over into looking at something and saying it's symbolic, well, you've lost it. Why? Because you can symbolic it in any direction. Remember, Mussolini was the Antichrist. You can, with statistics, as long as you leave out certain things here and there and twist and turn, check out the right group of people. I've been amazed. This is so bad, but evidently the American public are a lot dumber than you realize. But they came out, this is a few weeks ago, there was a poll. 51% of this poll said that Trump needed to be impeached. And then somebody took a look at what is known in when they do a poll, they're not the universe of the poll, but the sample of it. And when you're doing studies like that, if you say we sampled 1,000 adult males, and they all think that President Trump is absolutely evil, 100%. Well, and then you find out that those 1,000 men were all from Iran, but you just didn't say that. That's where you have to be looking. And they did the same thing with this. It turned out that I forgot what the percentage. I couldn't believe that they did this. I actually put this poll out there. The percentage of Republicans in the poll was something like 20%. The rest of it was Democrats and a few independents. And they come up and they said, see, our poll shows, folks, you need to figure out, wait a second, how are they defining who, and it's the same way in the Bible. And there are words that we can take literally, but it's a symbol. Now you need to hear me on that. You take it literally, but it's symbolic. I believe that the book of Revelation has a lot of things in there like that. And when we see the stars falling to the earth, you can say, well, it's going to be literal. It's going to be pretty tough to pull that one off. They're going to have to get a lot smaller before they hit the ground. And or we can either say it's literal, or we can say it's symbolic. But if we're going to do that, we're going to have to define how that symbolic is going to be. So let's do that a little bit. Turn over to the book of Ezekiel, Ezekiel 32. Benjamin, read verses 7 and 8. This is speaking of Babylon. This is speaking of Babylon. Go ahead.
And when I extinguish you, I will cover the heavens and darken their stars. I will cover the sun with a cloud, and the moon will not give its light. All the shining lights in the heavens I will darken over you, and will set darkness on your land, and declares the Lord God.
Okay. If we take that verse, the verses that we've looked at already in Daniel, the verses that we've looked at in Isaiah, and then the verses that we look at in Revelation chapters 12, 13, around in there, you start to get a definition of something that when God is talking about the stars falling, and we see this really defined well in Revelation chapter 12, where the great dragon, you got to take that literally. Really. He told us even, this is what the symbol means. It's Satan. And his tail tore out a third of the, you don't need to be worrying about that Satan is tearing down God's stars and the universe. We are given very specifically, here's who this dragon is. And we know what it's talking about. And over these areas that we just read about, it is pretty clear that we have symbolic language that is to be taken literally, because we've got definitions for it. Now, I understand what people are saying, well, you can just do anything with it, and you can. But you shouldn't. You should be careful in defining it as well as you can. And there's some things that speak loudly in their symbolism. Now, I wanted to bring that up simply because just to hit on a few things along those lines, because now I'm going to go into, well, if we look in, no, I won't make you go over and read those verses again. But I'm going to read a little bit since we brought up the sun, moon, stars thing. We have, this guy's talking about Jerusalem, and the book of Hebrews, oddly enough, is talking, it was a book written rather late, but from what we can tell, before the fall of Jerusalem. We don't know that for sure. And we hear the writer of Hebrews say, listen to this, but now he has promised, saying, yet once more will I shake not the earth only, but also the heavens. See, we go, oh, okay, well, he's coming in, and that's in chapter 12, 26. God verily shook things up, heaven and earth, to bring about the elimination of an old system, to institute a new one. Things that could be shaken were removed, things that could not be shaken remained. How about that? Just like he said. What could be shaken? A silly religion. What is going to remain? Well, that would be God, His Word, His law, His Spirit, His Son, those things. A kingdom which cannot be moved was received. The culmination of all these was shaking that took place at the ending of those days of tribulation. Immediately afterwards, and of course we believe during, and it was then brought about His new world order. Now I'm going to read now. It's going to get to be, so come on, just say to yourself right now, I'm going to stay awake. Mrs. Davis is going to be watching you. Oh, no. Leaders lead, Miss Davis. Leaders lead. You want to, I tell you what, you go to the back of the room so that they're not watching. Now, see, right away, I'm going to tell you, right away, what do we find? He wrote something down here that I disagree with. Now, I also agree with it because I don't have a problem with what he's saying, but he says this, the stars falling from heaven, and he quotes Matthew 24, represented the downfall of the entire Jewish commonwealth as represented by its leaders. See, right away, because we're looking at symbolic language, he went in a different direction. I don't think that's what it's talking about. I think when he was, and it could be, but remember, we've got that swallowed up with the stars, or with the sun and the moon. That would take care of the entire Jewish commonwealth. The stars are almost always talking about the powers, the principalities, and rulers, which happened. This poor guy was a Baptist, okay? He wouldn't believe in such stuff, which happened at, or I believe before Christ's ascension, that he defeated them, somewhere between the cross and that ascension. But that by that ascension, I mean that somewhere in that 50-day time period, because it was at the end of that, of the 40-day time period. Remember, when he looked at the disciples and said, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Folks, you know, we look back and we go, yeah, the disciples are going, when you're going to restore the kingdom to Israel, but we're not going to look at that right now. The fact is that Jesus was saying, I have taken out the powers, the principalities, and rulers. I've put my foot on their neck. The writ of accusation that was against you, and Paul's going to write about this later on, I laid down on top of that thing. It was crucified with me. You're free. And now you're free to go. And you need to go and make disciples. Now, again, Satan has been defeated. God has told those that are believers, I've given you authority. I've given you rulership. I've given you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. On and on and on. Satan's only defense is to, one way or another, distract the body by the things of the world, deceitfulness of riches, the worries of the world, desires for other things, or to lie to them, okay, about what really happened, or to in some way cover it up. He doesn't have to lie about my powers and principalities and rulers, they were all defeated, if you don't believe that there were ever any powers and principalities and rulers. He doesn't have to lie about the fact that Jesus told us that we could cast out demons if you don't believe in demons. He doesn't have to lie about that. So all he has to do, remember, one of his main deals is deception. So he deceives. And I think that the Word has got a lot of things that it's talking about as far as the spiritual warfare and that we're to be involved in. And anyway, Ms. Davis, you have anything you want to throw in on that? Okay, now I'm going to read, whether you like it or not. While I personally look on these things mentioned as apocryphal language. Now see, I look on the things we're about to write at as, no, this is not apocryphal language. But he looks at it. I do not mean to say that some were not actual and literal signs in those awful days. Luke 21, there will be signs in the sun and in the moon, the stars, upon the earth, distress of nations. Now, it's interesting. Stop a second. Listen to how Jesus, in fact, turn over there and let's look at it. Rightly dividing the word of truth. It's important, folks, it's important that we, this is why I showed you the stuff about what the computer, and you're able to chop up those sentences, and it makes you think in smaller bites. Makes you think in smaller bites. Okay, Luke 21:25. Now remember, he said that the stars was the Jewish commonwealth and the Jewish leaders and all this other stuff. Now let's read here. There shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. Men's hearts failing for fear, for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. If you look at those verses are screaming something. As much as I like this guy, and I do, and I think he's probably still alive, but those verses are screaming, you're wrong. Why? Why would I say such a thing? Look at those verses and tell me why I would say that his take is wrong. And it says it so loudly, at least twice.
It speaks of the signs of the stars, and then in the next verse talks about the powers of heaven.
Okay.
It's connected.
Okay, the stars are in heaven. Those are connected. Where's the disconnect? It's called the word and. I'll help you with that, okay? And kind of connects and disconnects. In this case, it's doing a little bit of a disconnect. Look, where will there going to be signs? First, where were the signs going to happen?
Sun, moon, stars.
And where? Okay, sun, moon, and stars. Where are they at?
In the heavens.
Okay, look at the word and. And then he says what? Upon the earth. Hello? I'm going to come out there and just... We haven't got... On the earth. Stars, up in the heavens, earth. Look at this. Next verse. Men's hearts failing them for fear, looking after those things which are coming on the earth. Why? Because the powers of the heaven will be shaken. Are you catching it, folks? Earth, heaven, earth, heaven, earth, heaven. Now, I'm kind of begging you, try to get a different mindset about things, okay? This is a whole lot of what this is about, is to help you begin to go, oh, earth and heaven, they're two separate things, and one of God's main things was to try to bring earth and heaven back together. I love that. This is my Father's world. That one line, and earth and heaven be one. He understood it. That guy understood it. All right. Now, here's the stuff that this guy thinks is apocryphal, so we're going to read. J.W. Farrar, drawing from Josephus, Tacitus, and the Talmud, summed up a few things when he said, okay, y'all ready for this? Now you need to hear, folks, you need to hear. In Jerusalem, men told how at the Passover of A.D. 65, a mysterious light had gleamed for 3 hours at midnight. We assume that was not 3 hours all piled into midnight, but it was around in there somewhere. In the holiest place, how the enormous gates of brass, which it required the exertions of 20 men to move, had opened of themselves, could not be closed, how at Pentecost the priests heard sounds as of departing deities who said to each other, "Let us depart hence." Might be well to look at some of them. Now remember, that's Josephus. Okay, we're going to read a little more from Josephus. Josephus, the historian, told us about. He gave us some of the details as he committed on the destructions also of the entire city with the signs and wonders that went before it. In his book of the War of the Jews, he said, while they did not attend nor give credit to the signs that were so evident and did plainly foretell their future desolation, but like men infatuated, without either eyes to see or minds to consider, did not regard the denunciations that God made to them. By the way, Josephus was not just a historian. Josephus believed he was a bit of a prophet too. And when you read his stuff, you kind of go, I think so too. Now, it's interesting, he is almost, I'm serious, he's almost quoting from Jesus there. Listen to this. He said, like men infatuated without eyes to see, minds to consider, did not regard the denunciations that God had made to them. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, if you had just known the day of your visitations. He who has eyes to see, ears to hear. Do you hear Josephus? This is Josephus writing in here, okay? Josephus, by the way, in his book, History of the Jews, declared that Jesus was Messiah. There's a line, a sentence in it where he says, Jesus who was Messiah. I don't have a quote right here, but it's there. Thus there was a star resembling a sword, which stood over the city, and a comet that continued a whole year. Thus, perturbations. Thus also before the Jews' rebellion, before these commotions which preceded the war, when the people were come in great crowds of the feast of unleavened bread on the 8th day of the month, and at the 9th hour of the night, So great a light shone round the altar in the holy house that it appeared to be bright daytime, which light lasted half an hour. This light seemed to be a good sign to the unskillful, but so interpreted by the sacred scribes so as to portend those events that followed immediately upon it. At the same festival also, this is one of the places where he says these are apocryphal. I kind of help him out with this one. At the same festival also a heifer, as she is led by the high priest to be sacrificed, brought forth a lamb in the midst of the temple. Now I'm kind of going, that one's getting pretty weird. But then again, why? Now I understand. I mean, I'm going, oh, come on. But why? Why not? God's done stranger things. You know, I mean, the bringing forth of a lamb, I understand it's not after its kind, but that's what the Jews are trying to do. Moreover, the eastern gate of the inner court, made of brass, which we just read, only 20 men could do it, bolts fastened very deep, which were made of one entire stone, was seen to be opened of its own accord about the 6th hour of the night. Those who kept watching the temple came upon, running to the captain of the temple, told him of it, and they came and they couldn't close the gate again. Men of learning understood what was going on. Security of the holy house was dissolved of its own accord. The gate was opened for the advantage of their enemies, publicly declared that the signal foreshadowed the desolation that was coming upon them. Besides these, a few days after that feast, 21st day of the month, a certain prodigious and incredible phenomenon appeared. I suppose the account of it would seem to be a fable, were it not related by those who saw it, and were not the events that follow it so considerable nature as to deserve such signals. For before the sun setting, chariots and troops of soldiers in their armor were seen running about among the clouds, surrounding of the cities. Moreover, at that feast which was called Pentecost, as the priests were going by night into the inner court, as was their custom, to perform their sacred ministrations, they said that in the first place they felt quaking, heard a great noise, and after that they heard a sound as a great multitude saying, "Let us remove hence." That's from the works of Josephus. Luke says, "There shall be upon the earth distress of nations, with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear, looking after those things which are coming on the earth." The Jewish Talmud tells us the rabbis were expecting the coming destruction of Jerusalem. In one section, one of the rabbis taught, during the last 40 years before the destruction of the temple, the doors of the Hakal, which I suppose is what that was talking about there, would be opened by themselves. This is a Jewish rabbi saying this is going to happen 40 years before it happened. But with this other guy, I'm not trying to get his name, said, "Why are you trying to be alarming us, predicting your own destruction? I know that you will be destroyed. For Zechariah ben Iddo has been prophesying concerning thee. Open your doors, O Lebanon, that the fire may devour your cedars." I didn't need to read that because I don't understand what that means. Those were the main things I wanted to read. I'm trying to see if there's other things here. It goes on talking about the tribulation, so I'm going to go back and I'm going to begin to read a little bit. And he just makes sure that he brings up that again, that these things were brought about and Jesus foretold them as coming about soon. And now I want to read a bit from what happened during the siege of Jerusalem. As you know, people in a lot of the teaching are waiting for this great tribulation to happen. And Corrie ten Boom is a little adamant about it. The recording we have of her is so bad it's hard to listen to. It's just old. But she really, in about a 12, 13-minute message, just pulls the hammer back and cuts loose on people. What are you looking for? Look at this. It's stupid. There's been tribulation coming and has happened for a long, long time. So we'll start with, in dealing with the entire matter of the Great Tribulation of Matthew 24. It might be well to announce or to summarize all the main events of the time of the escape of the Christians from the city, up to the time that the Roman general Titus camped his armies around Jerusalem. Now, by the way, yes, I'm reading to you. Yes, it may get kind of dull, but some of the stuff in here, you're just going, oh, you're kidding. Like some of the things that he talks about, lengths of times, and some of the dates that he's got in here, it's just, you wonder why in the world people would even look at anything else. But this guy brings up, he says, General Titus camped his armies outside Israel, and also what happened during the entire war, and then the final destruction of the temple and the city itself. Other commentaries on this subject had not given us all these details. Most of what I say is culled from the Jewish historian Josephus' account of these things. Now I'm going to read to you about Josephus, and you can figure out for yourself whether you think he might be a worthy historian. Josephus was a Jew who was actually present himself in those days. You can read the entire account in the works of Josephus, Volume 1, The War of the Jews. I shall give you the page numbers. It's in here. It would pay you to get a copy of this volume, reprinted by Baker House Book, etc., etc. The Jewish revolt against Rome began AD 65. AD 65. When suddenly they're seeing things. Though the Jews and the Romans felt each other a profound hatred, there was no overt rebellion till the days of Gessius Florus, who was appointed procurator in AD 65. Now, procurator, what Rome did was it was an empire. It was truly an empire. I mean, they ruled all sorts of places, and they would put people in charge over the different areas. Pontius Pilate was Rome. He was Roman, okay? Underneath him was Herod. Now, Herod, by the way, wasn't Jewish. He was Idumean. He was a different nationality that the Jews didn't like very much. But they mixed with the Jews a lot, but it was kind of the way that the high priest was in those days, highest bidder, okay? Pontius Pilate was there watching over Herod, but he also watched over other places too, and there were people that Rome had kind of here and there, and they always had the Roman soldiers there in the cities. But let's go on and read more about Josephus. Though they probably had nothing to do at all with the war against Jerusalem, it must be of passing interest here to mention at this point that in AD 64, Nero, AD 64, began his persecution of the Christians from Rome. One of the reasons that he did this, of course, is other than the fact that he was absolutely filled up with the devil, but was at the urging of the Jews. Those not Jewish Christians. They did not like the Christians because what was happening is that people were turning from the old, stale, dead religion, and they were running after Yeshua. In 64 AD, Nero began his persecution. You ready for this next sentence? Approximately 3.5 years of persecution on the Christians. Woo! 64 to 68 would almost fit into the same time slot as the approximate 3.5 years of tribulation upon the Jewish people in Jerusalem from AD 67 to 70. So 3.5 years there was this great great persecution of the Christians by Nero at the request of the Jews, but then the time of destruction of Judea until the final fall of Jerusalem was 3.5 years. Some months did separate the two periods. Of course, if the Christians had not fled from Judea and Jerusalem after Cestius Gallus, and Cestius Gallus is the guy, well, I think it goes on, talks about him here in a minute, yes, was the first general of Rome to come up to Jerusalem. And as we read about this, we begin to find out how the Christians got away and what happened in all of this with Vespasian and Titus and all these people. So the Christians had fled from Judea and Jerusalem after Cestius Gallus' withdrawal from the city. They too would have suffered the awful consequences of what happened. When Titus finally came upon the city, he felt that by destroying the Jews, he would therefore get rid of the Christians as well. But when he did come into the city, he did not find any Christians there, for they had all fled many months before. Fascinating stuff. I have read in my research that they have said that there is known of no Christians, no Christians that actually died in this, because they all left. Now, I want to read this because this kind of gives you a little more confidence in Mr. Bray here also. I shall not guarantee the accuracy of each and every date mentioned on these pages. Now, there are times that we can accurately say these things, but a good historian that's being truthful with you will go, yeah, well, we came close, but it wasn't quite there. At least they're being truthful, okay? In other words, he's not saying, I've changed it all so my propaganda will fit. In our research on these matters, we found some variations, inconsistencies in some of the accounts. But as a whole, I would hope the dates are fairly accurate and consistent. I tried to record all the proper dates with the various events that took place and in chronological order. First stage of the war against Jerusalem itself was by Cestius Gallus, October 15th to the 22nd, AD 66 is when it started. The war group, now by that he means the Jewish group, the Zealots, were in control of the city at that time. The Roman army pitched close to Jerusalem on Mount Scopus. Mount Scopus is just to the northeast of Jerusalem. And close enough that they could kind of watch over it again, looking for the high places, which is the best places for attack and defense. The Roman, on November 17th, Cestius led his troops into Jerusalem. They soon lost this battle against the Jews. Whoa! And fled. Now, how do you, a Roman general, get beat by the Jews? Well, the Jews meant it. See, these people, when they were zealots, they would spill their lives, and they were fighting for their country. They thought they were fighting for their God. I mean, they were a tough group. The first stage of the war against Jerusalem, we already read that. Yeah, Jesus told his disciples to get out of Jerusalem and Judea as fast as they could when they saw the armies surrounding the city. For those would be days of vengeance, that all things would be written be fulfilled. There would be great tribulation. The Christians took advantage of this lull in the war and escaped. So what happened was, and by the way, I need to tell you, nobody knows why Cestius Gallus withdrew. Yeah, he got defeated up in the war. He wasn't able to take, in the walls, wasn't able to take Jerusalem as a city, but there was no reason for him to fall back like he did, almost in retreat. And I personally believe that in some ways we see that in Revelation chapter 12. Remember what happened or what it said? Open up to it. Let's look at it real quick. Verse 6, the woman fled into the wilderness where she had a place prepared by God so that she could be nourished for 1,260 days. If we go on and read, go down to 13, the dragon saw it, he was thrown down, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. But 2 wings of the great eagle were given to the woman so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place where she was nourished for a time and a half from the presence of the serpent. Now, time and a half, again, is going to be, if we look back, well, we're not going to do that. But anyway, the serpent poured water out like a river so that the woman might be swept away with the flood. The earth helped the woman. Earth opened the mouth, drank up the river, which the dragon poured out of the mouth. Now, who knows what all of that means? I'm sure there are people that do, but it's very interesting. The Christians fled to a city called Pella, P-E-L-L-A. But the name eventually was changed to Petra, which almost all of us have heard of and know it was the place where it was almost unable to be defeated because it was, remember, this is the city that's up in the on the cliffs. Y'all know what I'm talking about? Yeah, it's a rock city. Is what it is, built in these caves. That's where they fled to. Pretty smart. The earth opened up. That's where they went, and that's where it became a very strong Christian city, because everybody that was in Judea and Jerusalem fled there eventually. Anyway, I just found that interesting that I have to find where I was. The next year, Nero sent Vespasian to Judea with the assumption, I think, that Cassius Gallus was canned somewhere, to stop the rebellion. His commission from Nero was in AD 67. The declaration of war against Judea occurred in the early part of February of that year. It was 3 years and 6 months later, 3 years and 6 months later, August the 10th, AD 70, at Jerusalem was destroyed. 3.5 years later from the time that war was. Sound familiar? That was the 42 months during which the holy city was given to the Gentiles to tread underfoot, Revelation 11:2. Much of all Judea was devastated before Jerusalem was ever reached. History of the Jewish people, Margolus and Alexander Marx state the Nazarenes, that is, those who accept Jesus of Nazareth as Messiah, indifferent to the national cause, sought safety in flight from Jerusalem. The small community settled in Pella beyond Jordan. I don't know if they were indifferent, but they were doing what Messiah had told them to. After Cassius Gallus retreated, following which all the Christian Jews fled from the city, went to Pella, later called Petra, in Perea. The Roman Emperor Nero, who reigned 13 years and 8 months until AD 68, determined to send armies and destroy Jerusalem. February of 67, Nero put Vespasian in charge of plans for a real war. Vespasian's son Titus came along with Dad, and in 67 AD, he advanced against the rebels. They had 60,000 soldiers. Gadara was the first target. Now, I'm going to go through, they're going through Judea. Okay, so I'm just going to read a few of the cities' names. Gadara was the first target. He came into it, slew all the youth. The Romans had no mercy on any age whatsoever. This was done out of the hatred that they bore the nation. That's a quote from Josephus. Jotapah was next, then Japhetha. 15,000 were destroyed. Over 2,100 taken as captives. Mount Gerizim, the Samaritans had assembled there. 11,600 were slain. Next, Tarikia, 6,500 killed. Gamala was next, 4,000 slain, 5,000 killed themselves by throwing themselves over cliffs. Then there was a small city of Geskala. There they slew 6,000 women and children, when many of the men fled and went to Jerusalem. Included in those that escaped was a man named John Levi. Now, John Levi we're going to talk about in a bit here, but he played a big part in the coming destruction of Jerusalem. John Levi was a bad guy. With a name like Levi, what did you expect? I hope you're listening. John Levi persuaded the people of Jerusalem. This is what he did. He persuaded the people of Jerusalem to go to war against the Romans instead of submitting to them. And remember now, John Levi fled from this small city. But one of the things he did when he got to Jerusalem is he deceived the people in Jerusalem about the power of the Roman armies. He lied to them. Oh, no, they don't have that many. It's not that bad. Why are you fleeing? Nobody answered that question, I guess. Vespasian and Titus took other cities. And it's interesting. It said that, again, Josephus, and he's not reading from the Lord Jesus Christ, but he said there was disorders and civil wars in every city. You shall hear wars and rumors of war. I just laugh at some of this. I go, this poor guy, he's quoting from Jesus and didn't even know he was doing it in his histories. Okay, conditions within the city. Y'all are doing good so far. You're staying, and we're going to stop around for. Jerusalem is now without a governor. Josephus, who had served as governor, was taken in the battle of Japhetha, which was earlier, but he gave himself up to the Romans. Now, this guy must have been slick. I'm telling you, because he's a general. Okay, he was fighting, but the different accounts that I've seen is that he showed himself to be quite valorous, and the Romans were impressed enough, and he could speak a lot of languages, was very intelligent, and eventually was taken in by Vespasian and Titus to use as a translator. And we'll read about that as we go along. He predicted Vespasian and Titus would become emperor of Rome after Nero. Vespasian took a liking to him. Can you imagine? Hey, you're going to be the next emperor. You are a guy that talks good stuff. You need to be my next translator. Josephus knew what he was doing. After the war, Josephus spent 5 years writing his history of the Jewish people. Anyway, so it's without a governor. Much wickedness was going on in the city that robbers themselves appointed high priests. These are thieves. It was gangs of unknown and ignoble persons who would cooperate with them in their wickedness. Again, this is Josephus. By casting lots, they chose Eliakim for the high priesthood, who was not only unworthy to be the high priest, but he did not even know what the high priest was. This is a quote from Josephus. One of the best esteems of the regular high priest, Ananus, not Ananias, but Ananus, said, "Certainly it has been good for me to die before I had seen the house of God full of so many abominations." That was before the Romans marched in. He said, "They have seized upon the strongest place of the whole city. You may call it the temple, if you please, though it be more like a citadel or fortress now." He accused the people of allowing all this to happen, exhorted them, this is going back to Levi, this is Annas, exhorted them to overthrow those robbers and zealots who wanted to go to war against Rome. Ananus chose 6,000 armed men as the wicked men had gone into the holy city, holy part of the temple. Now, you're listening to this. This is war going on between Jews, okay? The Romans they're not at Jerusalem yet. They're just kind of wiping out Judea as they're going along. Gone into the holy part of the temple, secured themselves there, staining the sanctuary with their blood. They even got drunk in the sanctuary. The zealots who were in control sent messengers to the Idumeans. Remember Herod, the Idumeans? And they brought in other people that the Jews hated, but these were bad guys. They sent message to the Idumeans to come and help them. And they sent 20,000 men. And they came into Jerusalem. They tried to close the gates to the Idumeans. Annas tried to do that, but men from the temple came with saws and opened the gates, let the Idumeans in. They succeeded in coming into the city at night during a heavy downpour of rain. They began murdering and looting. 8,500 people were slain. The Idumeans plundered every house, killed the high priests, including Ananus. Josephus said, "I shall not mistake if I said that the death of Ananus was the beginning of the destruction of the city, and that from this very day may be dated the overthrow of the walls and the ruin of the affairs." Josephus also added, and I cannot but think that it was because God had doomed this city to destruction as a polluted city. Now, this is the Jewish general that was running, and he was the Jewish, what did they call him a while ago? Governor over the place. And he is looking at it and saying it was a polluted city. That God was resolved to purge his sanctuary by fire. This is Josephus. This is not Isaiah come to life. It's not Jeremiah. This is a historian. Purged his sanctuary by fire. He cut off these great defenders and well-wishers. The Idumeans then slaughtered people to the extent of 12,000. After the Idumeans left, the zealots killed more of the people. Does this remind you, do you think that these people were related to Saul? I mean, remember how Saul was going to kill Jonathan because David was going to kill Jonathan. What are the zealots trying to do? We're going to preserve Jerusalem, and we're going to preserve the Jewish people. So what do? Kill the Jewish people. This is amazing. All of this caused Vespasian to bide his time in coming and attacking Jerusalem, while their enemies were destroying each other's at their own hands. I mean, why get in a worry? Why get in a rush? Vast numbers of dead bodies lay in heaps. The Romans hadn't gotten there yet, and the zealots would not allow them to be buried. This is quotes from Josephus. Vespasian, in the meantime, took Gadara, 15,000 slain, laid waste to other cities revolting from Nero. The people from Jerusalem were kept sealed in the city by the zealots. When Vespasian finally decided to march against Jerusalem, he heard that Nero was dead, AD 68. The empire passed to Galba, who reigned 2 months and 7 days, was slain. Then to Otho, who himself was reigning 3 months, 2 days. Vitellius held the government for 8 months and 5 days. More warring broke out by other factions led by Simon. Now Simon is another guy that was up inside here, had 20,000 armed men who ravaged the cities and villages and planned to go to Jerusalem and take it. At this time, John Levi was in control at Jerusalem. More will be said about him later. The high priest and the people decided to admit Simon and his army into the city to put down John and the zealots. Simon then gained possession of Jerusalem. I mean, what you're having is basically, I think what we're going to eventually see in the United States is just large groups of roaming gangs. And they were just, let's just drag these in. People that they called their own citizens were coming in and doing this. After Nero's death, Vespasian hastened back to Rome for the purpose of becoming emperor. He was proclaimed emperor by the army in July 69. The people were already celebrating. By the people, he means the people in Jerusalem, because the people in Jerusalem thought, oh, Nero's dead. We've got it made. They'd already made Vespasian kind of mad, I think. The people were celebrating with sacrifices and oblations when they heard this. Vespasian sent his son Titus with the select party of his army to destroy Jerusalem. Much fighting broke out inside the city between the warring factions. The factions of John and Simon were fighting each other. The areas around the temple were burned down. The innocent were killed. Nothing was done for the wounded. Dead bodies lay unburied. The soldiers fought on top of dead bodies. John Levi had already set on fire those houses that will... Get ready for this one. Remember Jesus making the statement that there would be great famines? People, okay, get ready. John Levi had set on fire those houses that were full of corn and all of the provisions. The same was done by Simon. Almost all the corn was burnt up, which would have been sufficient for a siege of many years. But these two clowns burned it up. I mean, this is just amazing. I mean, these people were moved by the devil. This was the direct occasion of that terrible famine, which consumed incredible numbers of the Jews in Jerusalem during its siege. Quote from Josephus. In Jerusalem, all those who were opposed to the rebellion against Rome were imprisoned and killed by zealots. This was a time for Jerusalem of great tribulation. Titus, in the meantime, had gotten his armies together at Caesarea, ordering other armies to meet him at Jerusalem. He marched to Jerusalem. He had armies from Italy, Syria, Egypt, and Greece. Remember the description of the what's called Armageddon? And all the armies of they gathered themselves at the plain of Megiddo, just outside Jerusalem. Titus pitched camp at Scopus near Jerusalem, and we'll stop there. The siege began April 14th, AD 70. We'll stop there, and then we'll pick it up later on. So don't think that I'm not going to make you sit and listen to me read, because it continues to stay interesting.